All right. We are going to go ahead and start recording now, and we will get going. All right. So the public education module is designed to capture the various different types of public education activity that a department might be doing. And that can be stuff from internally in the fire hall, out in the community, other presentations or things that they've done on stuff like public radio. There's the ability to capture kind of all of that in the module, depending on exactly how you set it up and configure it. So what we'll do is we'll start off with taking a look at public education records in general. When you are creating a public education record, these records work pretty much the same way that any other activity record in FirePro works, in that most of the time they are attached directly to property records. So when I go in and create a new public education record with the green plus button, I get popped into this search function, which allows me to search for a particular address or for a particular non-property record. The non-property records can be really useful for you if you're going ahead and creating public activity or public education activities that don't necessarily occur, say, at a specific address in the community, a public park, or if you are doing something on the radio or some other kind of activity like that, you can use the non-property records to just create a general file for those. Sometimes creating a non-property record like community public education, it works really well. Then you don't have to go into a ton of detail about exactly where it was. Alternatively, sometimes we see these attached directly to the fire department address if they're doing things like fire department tours. But in this case, we could say we're dealing with an activity that occurred at a specific location. So when I create a new public education record, I'm going to get some standard information up at the top about the record, and then a variety of different tabs down at the bottom. There is a fair bit of customization that you can do for the public education module, not maybe as much as something like personnel, but if we go into the setup menu under custom settings, we can go to the properties tab, and under properties, there is a pub ed tab where the public education custom configuration settings are. So one main option that we have is we can show or use a public education number, and we can either have a manual number for that, or we can have an automatically generated number. Like most automatically generated numbers in FirePro, once you start auto-generating the number, you have to put in the first one, and then it'll start counting from there. Manually just means you're going to put in your own numbers. The control access function is going to give you a couple different levels of control on public education records. So the basic control access toggle lets you have a public education record that can either be pending or closed. So a pending public education record is still editable by any user, but a closed one can only be changed by users with a specific permission on the public education module. So this gives you the ability to lock records so they can't be edited by all users. The only creator can edit function sets it up so that only the user profile or an administrator with the correct permission can make changes to the record at all. And that means whether or not it's pending or closed. So this is kind of a slightly more locked down version. Really depends on who you're giving access to the public education module in general, though, because like most modules in FirePro, it has its own separate permission set that you can use to determine, is this person supposed to have access to this module at all? You can also modify how time is calculated on these. So the default allows you to enter the start time, and we'll take a look at this when we go through the record in detail. But the default allows you to enter the start time and then the number of hours in duration. This toggle here will set it up so that you enter start and end time, and FirePro will automatically calculate duration for you. We also have a custom number field. We have a custom number default. This is often something that we will use if we're doing some sort of compensation or payroll tie-in, and we have a custom checkbox. So we can see where those will show up if we are using them. As usual with custom settings in FirePro, you just label it and those will start to appear. So the standard customization settings are going to control a little bit of what you see. And as in most cases, as soon as you start to turn on those custom fields, they will become available as search options. So when we look at a public education session, I'll just get one started here. We have a fair bit of information that we can enter. In this case, I've set it up so that the system is using start and end times. It'll figure out duration automatically. Duration in the case of public education sessions is always going to be used as a default for individual attendance times so that you can have a detailed breakdown of how much time each person spent at any individual pub ed session. And that can flow back into timesheets, hours worked reports, and if you want to, the compensation module, if you're running pay, can be used to pull times and pay times out of here. We have a number of customizable drop-down lists for public education records. Type generally is going to be a broad scale picture of what kind of public education activity was this. Was it a community event? Was it a fire hall tour? Was it some other kind of activity? Audience is generally going to be a broad scale breakdown of what kind of audience you were putting this presentation on for. These records are all customizable, all these lists, so you can modify them as necessary. What you want to think with audience, though, is that we do have a function called age groups that actually allows you to break down the age groups that you were putting on the presentations for and keep track of how many members of each age group you had. So usually audience tends to be more of a general breakdown of what kind of audience was this intended for. General public, school children, high schools, retirement community. So it's not often that you need to actually go into the details of ages on the audience list because you do have a better tool in the age groups to do that. Presentation is often going to be used to determine what kind of actual presentation were we putting on here. Was it a booth at a public activity? Was it a hall tour? Was it a talk with school kids? You're going to be able to run statistical reports on all of these different drop-down lists. So it's important to think when you're setting this up about, okay, how do I want to differentiate the different kinds of activities that I'm putting on? Because then I'll be able to spit out a report that says 20% of the time you were doing presentations to school kids and 50% of the time you were doing community engagement, stuff like that. You can also have, if you want to, multiple stations attached to an individual public education record. This means it will show up when you're searching by individual station for multiple different stations, and can be useful if you're in a situation where you have members, fire department members from multiple different areas coming in to assist. We do also have an unpaid checkbox here. This can be used both with the compensation module and when you are not using it. There are a variety of reports that you can run that will filter out unpaid activities, even if you're not necessarily using the payroll module. And we'll take a look at those as we go in. We can see our custom checkboxes here. And then, so that is going to show up. And then down at the bottom, we have our various different tabs of information. So personnel tends to be one of the primaries. And this is going to allow you to document exactly which people were there. And we can see we also have this custom number field that appears on the individual attendee section. Sometimes this is used to document a different breakdown between hours and paid hours, or if departments are using a points-based system, you can document that. You can also flag unpaid at an individual level if you want to. So it's possible to put in as many people as you want. It's also possible, if you need to put in people more than once if you want to do that. Normally, you don't have to. You just total up the amount of time that they spent if they came and went. The age groups tab, we looked at it a little bit already, but the age groups tab is going to allow you to document exactly which age groups were present or were intended to be here at this presentation, and you can put in total number of participants on a per age group basis. This is going to give you the ability to run statistical reports that's going to break down what age groups and total numbers of people that you were putting on public education activities for. The handouts tab is going to let you document exactly what handouts that you provided and how many you provided at an individual activity. This can be really useful if you're documenting it, because it means you can look back into history, say, look at last year, and give me a report that shows me how many of the various different handouts we used last year altogether, if you're looking at ordering or trying to get an idea of broadly what kind of amounts you're using. It can also be useful to just have that as a documentation piece. We have a generic notes tab, like most records. There's also a tab for inventory used. So because the inventory used tabs, similar to pictures and links, is linking records files to other records in FirePro. We do need to save the PubEd record before we start to attach inventory. And there's a couple different classes of inventory that will show up automatically. So your apparatus, for example, will always show up as an option to be added to public education sessions. Otherwise, if we look in the inventory module, inventory records can be the linking type set to apparatus PubEd properties. This means that this inventory item can be linked to other classes of equipment, other classes of record in FirePro. So anything that has this linking type will also show up as an option for things that you might have used at a public education session. So often this is something where if you are looking at saying, I really want to make sure that I'm documenting exactly what pieces of equipment I'm using, and potentially even the amount of cost or money to use that piece of equipment that you might need, you can go in there. If you're using something like our consumables tracking module, this linking will also allow you to track consumables and document how many of the consumables you used to keep that running total of how much is being used up. We do have a pictures and links tabs, just like many other records in FirePro. Now, once you start to finish some of these PubEd records and document them, there's going to be a couple of different places where this information is going to be useful to you. So there's a variety of statistical reports that are available right out of the public education module. So I can do a search for how many of the different PubEd items I did. And it's always important to remember that all those custom fields and additional columns are available for display. If you wanted to look at things like total participants and what audiences are put on there for, you can add those to your columns. But once I have searched for a specific set of records that I want to display, I can then use some of the statistical reports. The details report is a pretty straightforward one. This essentially mirrors the printed report that I might print straight out of the individual record. There is also an option to print a blank form right from a PubEd record. So I can print a blank public education summary if I want to fill it out while I'm actually there. The next report tends to be the most heavily used one, and this is the statistical breakdown report. So the way this report works is that it will look through all the selected public education records and show you what percentage of the time, both in true numbers and percentages, each of the different options that are available was selected. So in this case, we can see that of the 18 records that I had in my search, 18 of them were put on by a specific station. And we can see there was 1 of this type, 12 of this type, and it'll show you exactly what percentage that is. So we're also going to be able to see a statistical breakdown of the various different age groups that we're using, the different audiences these are intended for. Essentially, this will automatically go through all the information that you've entered and break it out statistically based on each records. So it should show you a really detailed breakdown of exactly what you're doing, what types of subjects you're putting on, how many times you're using each type of handout, as well as totals on how many each handouts were used, as well as totals of participant by age group and percentage. So it's going to essentially give you a full summary breakdown of all the public education records that you have selected in your search. So statistical report tends to be a really handy one. Age group served report is going to specifically look at the age groups that you've entered in the age groups tab, show you columns for each of the age groups that you have available, and then give you totals based on the different types of presentation that you're doing, and then total number of people in attendance, as well as total overall people that you've done the presentation for. So if capturing estimates of how many people you are reaching with these activities is important, then that can be a really helpful report. Then we have a totals by inventory used report. This report's really designed to give you a breakdown of exactly what kind of gear you've been using. You can go in and select specific types of inventory item, or just look for individual specific ones. So fair range of options there as far as what you might want to add, but you do have to pick specifically which ones you want. You're also going to be able to see that kind of information attached to the actual inventory items. It's going to show you that they were attached to PubEd records. The PubEd records are also going to show up on individual personnel files. So if we look under attendance for a person, we're going to be able to see all the PubEd records that this PubEd activities that this person has gone to, how much time they spent at each one of those. This also flows into some of the more detailed statistical reporting, especially the hours worked and the hours worked details report. So I can run an hours worked details report for whatever time period that I want. And one of the options I have is to include public education attendance. If I only want to see PubEd attendance, I can just select that one. As usual, this report gives me the ability to filter out unpaid sessions if I want to do that, depending on what ultimately I'm using this data for. So in this case, we can see exactly which public education sessions and what station they were put on for was attended by each individual person that I've selected in the department. So the public education information is going to flow back into those attendance logs for you as well. That pretty much covers the usage of the module. There is some secondary stuff that we might think about in terms of stuff like town. If I want to be filtering my public education activities by the town that I'm putting them in. Town is one of those pieces of information which is what we would call inherited. So you don't normally assign the public education activity to a specific town. You would look at the property that the public education record is attached to, and that is going to determine town information for those PubEd records. So that's going to fall into that category of organizing things using your property records when you're setting them up. So we have gotten to the point where I will normally take some questions. Does anybody have specific questions about what we've covered, or have some stuff from their own module that they're doing that they have questions about? Feel free to put notes in the chat or take yourself off mute. I did mute everybody just because of the background noise issue. And if you did miss anything at the very beginning, I'm happy to talk about anything like that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording then.